You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you. Chapter 38. River Queen triumphs in her treatment of chrysanthemum themes. And Lady Allspice is satirical on the subject of crabs. The last chapter concluded with Bao Chai and Xiangyun retiring for the night after their plans for the morrow had been completed. This one begins next morning, when Xiangyun invited Grandmother Jia and the rest to a cashew viewing party in the garden. Touched by her enthusiasm, the grown-ups readily agreed to go. "She is so excited, bless her," said Grandmother Jia. "We ought to let her do this, even though she is our guest." And having promised, she was as good as her word, and arrived in the garden at noon, bringing Lady Wang Shifeng, and Aunt Xue with her, and a number of attendant maids. "Now where is it going to be?" she asked them. "Wherever you like, Mother," said Lady Wang dutifully. "I think they've already prepared for us in the Lotus Pavilion," said Shifeng. "The blossom on the 2 cashew trees is particularly fine there this year, and there is that lovely clear, emerald water. When you sit in the little center pavilion, you have water all round you, which gives you a wonderful feeling of spaciousness. And looking at water is so restful for the eyes." "Very well," said Grandmother Jia, and began to lead the way to the Lotus Pavilion. The pavilion was built in the middle of the garden's little river, at one of the places where it broadened into a wide, deep pool. It had windows all round it, and could be approached either circuitously from one side by way of one of the 2 many-angled covered piers leading to its left and right-hand verandas, or more directly from the other by means of a bamboo bridge leading to the center of the veranda at the back. It was towards this bamboo bridge that the party was now making its way. As Grandmother Jia stepped onto it, Shifeng hurried forward to support her. "You can put your feet down as hard as you like, Granny," she said. "Bamboo bridges always creak like this when you go over them. They are meant to." The Lotus Pavilion was in reality not 1 pavilion, but 2, for the main pavilion properly so called gave on to a smaller pavilion, referred to simply as the Water Pavilion, or the Center Pavilion, which was in the very middle of the little lake. When they were all inside the main pavilion, they noticed that 2 bamboo tables had been set out on the veranda. On one of them were ranged wine cups, chopsticks and all things needful for serving wine, and on the other were teacups, teapots, tea whisks, saucers, and various other tea things. Beside the tea table 2 or 3 maids were busy fanning a little tripod stove on which water for tea making was being boiled, while at the other end of the veranda maids were fanning a stove on which water for warming the wine kettles was being heated. Grandmother Jia was particularly impressed by the arrangements for tea making and remarked with pleasure how clean everything looked, including the spot that had been chosen for the party. "Cousin Bao Chai helped me get it ready," said Xiangyun. "Well, I've always said she was a thoughtful child," said Grandmother Jia. "A lot of thought has certainly gone into these preparations." As she was speaking, her eye fell on a pair of boards that hung from 2 of the pillars. The couplet inscribed on them was in mother o' pearl inlay on a black lacquer background. She asked Xiangyun to read it out to her. This is what it said. "Lotus reflections shatter at the dip of a lazy oar blade. Lotus fragrances float up from the swirl round a bamboo bridge pile." After hearing the couplet, Grandmother Jia glanced up at the horizontal board, which bore the name of the pavilion, and was in characters large enough for her to read herself. She turned to Aunt Xue, who was standing beside her. "When I was a girl, there was a pavilion like this one in our garden at home. It was called, let me see, Above the Clouds, because of the sky reflected in the water below, you see. When I was about the same age as these young people are now, I used to go with the others every day there to play. One day I slipped and fell down into the water. I nearly drowned. They had a terrible job getting me out. And even then I caught my head on one of the wooden pegs on the way up. I've still got a place big enough to put the tip of a finger in where it hit me. It's on the side here, just where the hair begins. Of course, at the time everyone thought it was all up with me. They were sure that after being all that time in the water I'd catch my death of cold. But I got over it." "If you hadn't," said Shifeng before anyone else could speak, What would have happened to all the good fortune you've enjoyed, Granny? It's obvious you were meant to have it, otherwise why would you have been given that dent in your head? The guardian spirits must have put it there to store your good fortune in. Old Longevity has got a dent in his head, too, only his has got so much good fortune packed into it that it bulges out a bit. This comical allusion to the god of longevity's enormous cranium set all of them laughing, including, of course, the old lady herself. Naughty monkey, she said. Make fun of me, would you? I'd like to tear that wicked mouth of yours. It's because I wanted to make you laugh, Granny. Laughter makes the humors circulate. We're going to be eating crabs shortly, and I was afraid that the cold of the crab meat might settle on your heart. If I can make you laugh and stir your humors up, you'll be able to eat as much crab as you like without taking any harm from it. In that case I shall have to keep you with me all the time, so that I am always laughing, said Grandmother Jia. I'll have to stop you going home at night. It's because you indulge her so much that she is so cheeky, Mother, said Lady Wang. By saying things like that to her you will make her even worse. But I like her cheekiness, said Grandmother Jia. After all, there's no harm in it. She knows what's what underneath it all, of course she does. I think it's nice that the young people should feel free to joke and laugh a bit when we are all on our own together. We don't want them behaving like a lot of stuffed dummies, surely? While she was saying this, they all passed into the smaller pavilion, where tea was served, after which Shifeng came bustling in with wine cups and chopsticks and began to lay. Grandmother Jia sat with Aunt Shui, Bao Chai, Dai Yu and Bao Yu at a center table, and Xiang Yun, Lady Wang, Ying Chun, Tan Chun and Shi Chun at a table on the east side of the room. A little table was laid for Shifeng and Li Wan on the west side of the doorway, but this was only for form's sake, since both of them remained on their feet in order to wait on the other two tables. We shan't want all the crabs at once, said Shifeng to the servants bringing them in. 10 will be enough to start with. The others can go back into the steamer. She called for some water, and after washing her hands, stood at the center table facing Grandmother Jia and began shelling the crabs. She offered the first meat, as a courtesy, to Aunt Shui. No thank you, said Aunt Shui. I don't need anyone to do it for me. I like doing it myself and getting crabby fingers. I think they taste better when you eat them with your fingers. Shifeng gave the crab meat she had prepared to Grandmother Jia. The second lot she offered to Bao Yu. Then she called for some really hot wine. She also sent a little maid to fetch mung bean flour scented with chrysanthemum leaves and cassia for cleaning the fingers with and removing the smell of crab. Xiang Yun sat with the others at her own table for a while, but as soon as she had finished her first crab, got up to look after her guests. She also went outside and gave orders for a plate of crabs to be taken to Aunt Zhao and another to Aunt Zhou. At once Shifeng came bearing down on her. You're not used to this. You get on with your eating and leave this to me. I'll have mine when the rest of you have finished. But Xiang Yun, refusing to be put off, ordered a long table to be laid on the veranda at the far side of the Lotus Pavilion and invited the maids Faithful, Amber, Sunset, Sinclude and Patience to come and sit at it. Faithful glanced laughingly in Shifeng's direction. I can't very well sit down and eat while Mrs. Lien is waiting on everybody. That's all right, said Shifeng. You all go and sit down. I'll take care of everything. At that Xiang Yun, too, went back to her seat. Li Wan and Shifeng now made a brief pretense of joining in the party, but Shifeng was soon on her feet again ministering to the rest. After a few minutes she went out onto the veranda, where Faithful and the other maids were regaling themselves with great gusto. They rose to their feet when they saw her come. What have you come out here for, Mrs. Lien? Said Faithful. Can't you leave us alone to enjoy ourselves for a bit? Well, aren't you disagreeable, said Shifeng. Here am I doing all the work for you, but instead of thanks I get grumbled at. I was hoping you would offer me a drink. Faithful, laughing, quickly filled a wine cup and held it to Shifeng's lips. Tilting her head back, Shifeng drained it at a gulp. Amber and Sunset followed suit, and 2 more cupfuls went down in the same way. Meanwhile, Patience had been scooping out some yolk, the delicious golden crab spawn, which she now offered to her mistress. Xifeng told her to put lots of ginger and vinegar on it, then, having quickly disposed of it, "You can all sit down now, and get on with your party," she said. "I'm going." "What a nerve," said Faithful. "Scrounging off us like that." "You'd better be careful what you say to me, my girl," said Xifeng with a smile. "I suppose you realize that Mr. Lien has taken a fancy to you, and is going to ask her old ladyship if he can have you for his number 2. Faithful tooted and shook her head. It was easy to see that she was blushing. "Ha," she said. "Fancy a lady saying a thing like that. I'm going to wipe my smelly fingers on your face, Mrs. Lien, if it's the last thing I do." No. "Please. Forgive me," said Xifeng, as Faithful stood up to carry out her threat. "Even if she does," said Amber, laughing, "I wouldn't be too sure that Patience will. Look at her, all of you. She hasn't eaten 2 crabs yet, but she's already finished a saucerful of vinegar." Patience, who had in her hand a crab richly endowed with yolk that she had just finished shelling, held it up when she heard this jibe and advanced on Amber, intending to smear her face with it. "You nasty, spiteful little creature," she said, both laughing and indignant. "I won L." But Amber dodged aside, and Patience, losing her balance, plastered the crab smack onto her mistress's cheek. Xifeng, at that moment still preoccupied with Faithful, was taken completely by surprise. Her startled "Io" was too much for the maids, who collapsed in uncontrollable laughter. Xifeng presently joined in, though cursing Patience as she did so. "Stupid cow. Are you too drunk to see straight? All over my face." Patience hurriedly wiped it off and fetched water for her to wash with. "Holy name," said Faithful. "That was a judgment, if ever there was one." Hearing the laughter outside, Grandmother Jia eagerly asked to know its cause. "What is it? What have you seen that's so funny? Tell us, so that we can share the joke." Faithful shouted back, amidst laughter. "Mrs. Lien came over here and stole some of our crab. Patience didn't like it, so she smeared crab yolk all over her mistress's face, and now the 2 of them are having a fight." Hoots of laughter from Grandmother Jia and Lady Wang. "Poor Mrs. Lien," said Grandmother Jia. "You ought to feel sorry for her. Couldn't you spare her a few of the legs, or some of the underneath bits?" There was renewed laughter from the maids. Faithful shouted back again. "She can have all the crab's legs on this table, and very welcome to them." Xifeng, taking all in good part, finished washing her face, and went back to help Grandmother Jia, and the others at the center table with their crabs. Diyu dared not eat very much because of her delicate health, and after consuming a little of the claw meat, excused herself from the table. Soon Grandmother Jia, too, had finished eating, and everyone washed their hands and broke off for a while to amuse themselves, some going off to admire the flowers, some to drop things in the water, and watch the fish rise. "It's rather windy for you here, Mother," said Lady Wang, "especially after you've just been eating crab. Perhaps you ought to go back to your own room now and rest. If you have enjoyed it, we could come again tomorrow." "Yes, perhaps you are right," said Grandmother Jia. "I hadn't been going to leave, because I could see how much they were all enjoying themselves, and was afraid of spoiling the fun. But perhaps you and I ought to be getting along now." As she rose to leave, she turned to address Xiang Yun. "Don't let your cousin Bao Yu eat too much." "No, Grandma." She turned once more as she was leaving, this time including Bao Chai in her admonition. "And don't you two eat too much, either. Crab is very good to eat, but it isn't very good for you. If you eat too much of it, it will give you stomachache." "Yes, Grandma." The 2 girls saw her out of the garden. When they were back again, they gave orders for the tables to be cleared, and a new set of places to be laid, but Bao Yu objected. No, don't lay again, he said. We want to get on with the poetry. Put the big round table in the middle with all the food and drink on it so that we can help ourselves when we feel like it and sit where we like. That will be much nicer than having set places. Bao Chai agreed, but Xiangyan reminded them that there were others besides themselves to be considered, and having first ordered a separate table to be laid and some good hot crabs to be selected, she invited Aroma, Nightingale, Chess, Scribe, Picture, Oriole, and Ebony to come and sit at it. After that she had a couple of carpets spread out on the ground beneath the cassia trees at the foot of the rockery, and made the old nannies and junior maids sit down on them and eat and drink to their heart's content, insisting that they need only get up to wait on them if they were specially called for. Then she took the list of poem titles and pinned it to the inside wall of the pavilion. Very original, the others commented when they had finished reading the titles, but went on to express the fear that they might find them difficult to write on. Xiangyan explained what they had decided about rhymes, viz. that there should be no set rhyme scheme, and everyone should be free to choose their own. Now that's what I call sensible, said Bao Yu. I can't stand set rhymes. Dai Yu had a barrel-shaped porcelain taboret moved up to the veranda's edge, and having selected a fishing rod for herself, sat leaning on the railing, fishing. Bao Chai sat for some time silently contemplating a spray of cassia she had picked, then, leaning over the railings and idly plucking off the flowerets, dropped them one by one into the water, and watched the fish swim up from below and nibble at them with plopping noises as they floated on the surface. Xiangyan for the most part sat quietly musing, occasionally getting up to look after Aroma and the other maids at the table outside, or to make sure that the people sitting on the carpets were getting enough to eat and drink. Tan Chun stood with Li Wan and Shi Chun in the shade of a weeping willow, watching the waterfowl. Ying Chun sat apart from the rest beneath a flowering tree, stringing jasmine blossoms into a flower chain with a needle and thread. Bao Yu watched Dai Yu fishing for a bit, then went over and leaned on the railings and talked with Bao Chai for a bit, and finally, after watching Aroma and the other maids eating and drinking at their table, ended up by drinking with them himself while Aroma shelled a crab for him. Presently Dai Yu put down her fishing rod, went over to the central table, took up a silver self-service wine kettle whose surface was carved with a nielloed plumflower pattern, and, having selected a little shallow, rose quartz wine cup, was just about to pour herself a drink, when a maid observed her and came hurrying up to do it for her. No, let me pour it myself, said Dai Yu. That is half the fun. You get on with your party. So saying, she proceeded to half-fill the tiny receptacle with liquor from the silver kettle. But it proved to be yellow rice wine, whereas what she wanted was spirits. I only ate a small amount of crab, she said, but it has given me a slight heartburn. What I really need is some very hot samshu. We have some, said Bao Yu, and quickly ordered a kettle of special mimosa-flavored samshu to be heated for her. Dai Yu took only a sip of it before putting the wine cup down again. Presently Bao Chai strolled up and helped herself to the samshu. She, too, put her cup down after taking only a tiny mouthful of it. Then she moistened a brush with ink, and going over to the list of titles, put a tick over the first one, remembering the chrysanthemums, and wrote the word allspice underneath it. Please leave number 2 for me, Chai, said Bao Yu anxiously. I've already thought of 4 lines for it. Bao Chai laughed. I've had a hard enough job thinking of lines for this first one. You've nothing to worry about as far as I'm concerned. Dai Yu, without saying a word, quietly relieved Bao Chai of the brush, ticked first questioning the chrysanthemums, and then the 11th title, The Dream of the Chrysanthemums, and wrote river underneath each of them. After her, Bao Yu took up the brush and ticked seeking the chrysanthemums. He signed himself green. Tan Chun now drifted over and looked at the list. Oh, hasn't anyone chosen wearing the chrysanthemums yet, she said. Let me do that one. She turned, smilingly, to Bao Yu and pointed a warning finger at him. We've just made a new rule, by the way. No naked ladies this time, please. You have been warned. Xiangyan strolled up while she was saying this and ticked numbers 4 and 5, admiring the chrysanthemums and arranging the chrysanthemums in rapid succession. She signed herself Xiang underneath them. "You ought to have a pen name like the rest of us," said Tan Chun. "There are various pavilions and studios at home, of course," said Xiang Yun, "but I don't live in any of them. It would be rather pointless to call myself after a building like the rest of you." "What about that water pavilion above the clouds that Lady Jia was telling us about?" said Bao Chai. "You could call that yours. Even if it doesn't exist anymore, you can pretend that it would have been yours. You should call yourself Cloud Maiden. "Yes, yes," said the others, and before Xiang Yun herself could do anything, Bao Yu had crossed out the Xiang and substituted the word cloud beneath it. In less time than it would take to eat a meal, poems had been completed for each of the 12 titles. The young poets then wrote out their poems and handed them in to Ing Chun, who copied them out, each with the full pen name of its author, onto the finest snow wave notepaper. Li Wan then read them all through, the others overlooking her. Remembering the Chrysanthemums. By Lady Allspice. The autumn wind that through the knotgrass blows blurs the sad gazer's eye with unshed tears. But autumn's guest, who last year graced this plot, only as yet in dreams of night appears. The wild geese from the north are now returning. The dobi's thump at evening fills my ears. Those golden flowers for which you see me pine, I'll meet once more at this year's 99. Seeking the Chrysanthemums. By Green Boy. The crisp day bids us go on an excursion, resistant to the wine shop door's temptation. Some garden where, before the frosts, was planted the glory of autumn, being our destination, which after weary walk having found, we'll sing an autumn song with unsubdued elation. And you, gold flowers, if all the poet told you understood, would not refuse his gold. Planting the Chrysanthemums. By Green Boy. Brought from their nursery and, with loving hands, planted along the fence and by the door. A shower last night their wilting leaves revived, opening the morning buds all silver hoar. Sweet flowers, 1,000 autumn songs I'll sing, to praise your beauty, and libations pour, and water you, and ridge with earth around. No dust on my wet well path shall be found. Admiring the Chrysanthemums. By Cloud Maiden. Transplanted treasures, dear to me as gold, both the pale clumps and those of darker hue. Bareheaded by your wintry bed I sit, and, musing, hug my knees and sing to you. None more than you the villain world disdains. None understands your proud heart as I do. The precious hours of autumn I'll not waste, but bide with you and savor their full taste. Arranging the Chrysanthemums. By Cloud Maiden. What greater pleasure than the lute to strum, or sip wine by your delicate display, to hold the garden's fragrance in one vase, and see all autumn in a single spray? On frosty nights I'll dream you back again, brave in your garden bed at close of day. Since with your shy disdain I sympathize, 'tis you, not summer's gaudy blooms I prize. Celebrating the Chrysanthemums. By River Queen. Down garden walks in search of inspiration, a restless demon drives me all the time. Then brush blooms into praises, and the mouth grows acrid sweet, hymning those scents sublime. Yet easier 'twere a world of grief to tell, than to lock autumn's secret in one rhyme. That miracle old Tao did once attain, since when 1,000 bards have tried in vain. Painting the Chrysanthemums. By Lady Allspice. The brush that praised them, eager for more tasks, would paint them now, for painting's no great cost. When cunning black ink blots the flowers leaves make, and white the petals, silvered o'er with frost. Fresh scents of autumn from the paper rise, and shapes unmoving by the wind are tossed. No need at double ninth live flowers to pluck. These living seem, upon a fine screen stuck. Questioning the Chrysanthemums. By River Queen. since none else autumn's mystery can explain. I come with murmured questions to your gate. Who, world disdainer, shares your hiding place? Of all the flowers, why do yours bloom so late? The garden silent lies in frosty dew. The geese return, the cricket mourns his fate. Let not speech from your silent world be banned. Converse with me, since me you understand. Wearing the Chrysanthemums. By Plantain Lover. Just to admire and not for our adornment, were these reared and arranged with so much care. Yet young Sir Fop, with whom flowers are a passion, and drunk old Tao both dote on flowers to wear. One's headcloth reeks of autumn's acrid perfume. Chill dew of autumn pearls the other's hair. The vulgar crowd, which nothing understands, stops in the street and, jeering, claps its hands. The Shadow of the Chrysanthemums. By Cloud Maiden. The autumn moonlight through the garden steals, filtered in patches variously bright. Flowers by the house as silhouettes appear. Flowers by the fence are flecked with coins of light. In the flowers' wintry scent their souls reside. Not in those frost forms, than a dream more slight. Even the gross vandal, squinting through drunken eyes, can, by their sense, the crushed flowers recognize. The Dream of the Chrysanthemums. By River Queen. Light-headed in my autumn bed I lie, and seem to chase the moon across the sky. Well, if immortal, I'll go seek old Tao, not imitate Zhuang's flittering butterfly. Following the wild goose, into sleep I slid, from which now, startled by the cricket's cry, midst cold and fog and dying leaves I wake, with no one by to tell of my heart's ache. The Death of the Chrysanthemums. By Plantain Lover. The feasting over and the first snow fallen, the flowers frost-stricken lie or sideways lean, their perfume lingering, but their gold hue dimmed, and few poor, tattered leaves bereft of green. Now under moonlit bench the cricket shrills, and weary goose files in the cold sky are seen. Yet of your passing let me not complain. Next autumn equinox we'll meet again. Each poem was praised in turn, and the reading of the whole 12 concluded amidst cries of mutual admiration. Now just a moment, said Li Wan, interrupting their encomiums. Let me first try to give you an impartial judgment. I think there were good lines in all of the poems, but comparing one with another, it seems to be that one is bound to place celebrating the chrysanthemums first, with questioning the chrysanthemums second, and the dream of the chrysanthemums third. The titles themselves were original, and particularly in their treatment of the subject, these are 3 highly original poems. So I think that today the first place must undoubtedly go to River Queen. After those first 3 I would place Wearing the Chrysanthemums, Admiring the Chrysanthemums, Arranging the Chrysanthemums, Painting the Chrysanthemums, and Remembering the Chrysanthemums in that order. Bao Yu clapped his hands delightedly. Absolutely right. A very fair judgment. I'm afraid mine aren't really all that good, said Dai Yu. They are a bit too contrived. There's nothing wrong with a bit of contrivance, said Li Wan. One doesn't want the structure of a poem to stand out too ruggedly. I very much like that couplet of Cloud Maidens, said Dai Yu. On frosty nights I'll dream you back again, brave in your garden bed at close of day. It's a technique that painters call whitebacking. That marvelous couplet that comes before it. To hold the garden's fragrance in a vase, and see all autumn in a single spray, already sums up all there is to be said on the subject of flower arrangement. You feel that she's left herself nothing else to say. So what does she do? She goes back to the time before the flowers were arranged, before they were picked, even. That going back in her frosty nights couplet is a very subtle way of throwing the main theme into relief, just as the artist's whitebacking sharpens the highlights on the other side of the painting. Li Wan smiled. That may be so, but your own acrid sweet couplet is more than a match for it. I think Lady Allspice dealt with her subject most effectively, said Tan Chun. That couplet of hers. But Autumn's guest, who last year graced this plot, Only as yet in dreams of night appears. Seems to bring out the idea of remembering so vividly. Well, your headcloth reeking of autumn's acrid perfume, and chill dew of autumn pearling the hair give a pretty vivid image of wearing chrysanthemums, said Bao Chai with a laugh. And river queens who shares your hiding place? Why do you bloom so late, said Xiang Yun, smiling mischievously, make so thorough a job of questioning them, that one feels the poor things must have been quite tongue-tied. For that matter, said Li Wan, entering into the spirit of the thing, your persistent haunting of the chrysanthemums, sitting bareheaded by their wintry bed and hugging your knees and singing to them, makes one suspect that if the chrysanthemums really had consciousness, they might, in the end, have grown just a tiny bit tired of your company. The others all laughed. I seem to be bottom again, said Bao Yu ruefully. Though I must say I should have thought that. To go on an excursion. Some garden where was planted. The glory of autumn being our destination. And so forth was a perfectly satisfactory exposition of seeking the chrysanthemums, and that. A shower last night the wilting leaves revived. Opening the morning buds all silver hoar. Dealt with the theme of transplanting chrysanthemums rather successfully. Hi-ho. I suppose it's just that I couldn't produce anything quite as good as River Queen's acrid sweet line, or Cloud Maidens bareheaded by your wintry bed, or Plaintain Lovers reeking headcloth, or Few Poor, tattered leaves, or Lady Allspice's autumn guest in dreams of night appears. Well, never mind, he went on, after a moment's reflection. Perhaps tomorrow or the day after, if I've got the time, I'll try to do all 12 of them again on my own. Your poems were perfectly all right, said Li Wan consolingly. It's simply, as you yourself have just said, that they didn't have anything quite as good as the lines you have mentioned. Discussion of the poems continued a little longer, after which they called for another lot of hot crabs, and sat down at the large round table to eat them. Eating crab and admiring the kasha like this is itself a good theme for a poem, said Bao Yu. I've already thought of one. Is anyone else game to have a try? He quickly washed his hands and taking up a brush, wrote down the poem he had thought of. The others then read what he had written. How delightful to sit and a crab's claw to chew. In the kasha shade, with some ginger sauce too. Old Grimchops wants wine, though he's got no inside. And he walks never forwards, but all to one side. The yolks are so tasty, who cares if we're ill? Though our fingers we've washed, they are crab-scented still. O crabs, Dongpa said, and his words I repeat. You have not lived in vain if you're so good to eat. One could churn out that sort of poem by the dozen, said Dai Yu. You've used up all your inspiration, said Bao Yu, but instead of admitting that you can't write any more, you make rude remarks about my poem. Dai Yu made no reply, but tilted her head back, lifted up her eyes, and for some minutes could be observed muttering softly to herself. Then, picking a brush up, she wrote out the following poem rapidly, and without hesitation. In arms and in armor they met their sad fate. How tempting they look now, piled up on a plate. The white flesh is tasty, the pink flesh as well. Both the white in the claws and the pink in the shell. And we're glad he's an 8 not a 4-legged beast. When there's plenty of wine to enliven the feast. So with crab let us honor the double 9th day. While chrysanthemums bloom neath the kasha's spray. Bao Yu had read this, and was just beginning to say how good he thought it was when Dai Yu impetuously tore it up, and told one of the servants to take away the pieces and burn them. It's not as good as yours, she said. It deserves to be burnt. Actually yours is very good, better even than the chrysanthemum ones. You ought to keep it to show people. I've thought of one too, said Bao Chai. It was rather a struggle, so I'm afraid it won't be very good, but I'll write it down anyway for a laugh. Then she wrote down her poem, and the others read it. With wine cups in hand, as the autumn day ends. And with watering mouths, we await our small friends. A straightforward breed you are certainly not. And the goodness inside you has all gone to pot. There were cries of admiration at this point. That's a very neat bit of invective, said Bao Yu. I can see I shall have to burn my poem now. They read on. For your cold humors, ginger, to cut out your smell. We've got wine and chrysanthemum petals as well. As you hiss in your pot, crabs, do ye look back with pain? On that calm moonlit cove and the fields of fat grain? When they had finished reading, all agreed that this was the definitive poem on the subject of eating crabs. It's the sign of a real talent, they said, to be able to see a deeper, allegorical meaning in a frivolous subject, though the social satire is a trifle on the harsh side. Just then Patience arrived back in the garden. But what then ensued will be told in the following chapter. You are listening to PastThink.com audiobook. Please like and subscribe, thank you.